The evening sun sagged low, spilling molten light over the barren sweep of land. The air was dry enough to crack a man's lips, and the wind carried with a faint smell of dust and mesquite smoke from somewhere far off. Elias Crowder's horse plodded along the fence line, hooves pressing soft into the parched soil, the rhythm steady, unhurried. He'd ridden this stretch more times than he could count, but something in the distance caught his eye, a stillness too strange to ignore. There, at the far post where a wire met weathered cedar, a shape clung to the wood. For a heartbeat, he thought it was a tangle of cloth, a rag left to rot. Then it shifted, and he saw the curve of a shoulder, the thin line of a jaw. She was bound by rope, wrists rubbed raw against the strands, her hair a tangled curtain hiding most of her face. The sun poured over her like fire, painting her skin in a sheen of sweat and dust. He swung down from his saddle, without a word. His knife slid easily from its sheath. The rope resisted, then gave. When the last strand fell away, she sagged to her knees, but did not look at him. He crouched to her level, the dry earth biting into his knees. "What's your name, girl?" His voice was low, steady, like water over stone. "Clara May," she murmured, so soft he almost didn't catch it. Her gaze flickered toward the horizon. "My pa didn't want me no more." Elias studied her, not with pity but with something heavier. He knew what it meant to be left behind. "Can you ride?" She gave a small nod. He lifted her onto the mare, then mounted behind her, the leather creaking under their weight. Neither spoke on the ride back. The silence was not awkward. It was the kind born of two people with nothing yet safe to say. The ranch sat alone against the sweep of land, a low house with a wide porch, flanked by a barn whose boards had seen years of wind and sun. Inside, he set her by the fire, placing a tin plate of stew on the table. She ate in quick, quiet bites, not meeting his eyes. The popping of the fire filled the room, each spark a tiny reminder of warmth. Elias sat opposite her, watching how she kept her shoulders tight, how her eyes darted to the door every few moments. "You can take the room down the hall," he said at last. She froze, spoon halfway to her mouth, then nodded and rose. He listened to her footsteps fade, then sat in the long quiet, thinking of the boy he had been, once left among the dead, cold wind tearing through his shirt, wondering why no one came back for him. Morning brought the scent of strong coffee and the cry of a hawk overhead. Elias saddled his horse for the trip into town, and Clara stood by the porch, the blanket he'd given her wrapped tight around her. "Stay here," he said. "Won't be long." She didn't answer, but her eyes followed him until the land swallowed his figure. Town was small, the kind where every face knew the rest. Jed Boone, the storekeeper, leaned on the counter as Elias stepped inside. "Here you've got company out yonder," he said, his voice carrying enough of the two women by the flour sacks to hear. "Don't seem right. A man living alone taking in a girl like that." Elias met his gaze without flinching. "Don't seem right. Leaving her to die neither." The words landed heavy, but Jed only grunted. As Elias turned, Maybelle Hart, all brassy voice and sharp eyes, appeared from the saloon doorway across the street. "You mind your own," she called to Jed, then to Elias, quieter, "Watch yourself. Some folks don't bother with truth when talk's cheaper." The sheriff, Harlan Pike, stopped him near the hitching post. "Crowder," he said, "just be careful for appearance's sake." Elias didn't bother replying, just mounted and rode home with cloth, a few supplies, and a small stack of old books. Days stretched slow. He taught Clara how to saddle a horse, how to listen for coyotes in the still dark hours. She mended one of his shirts without being asked, placed his boots neatly by the door. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the sky burn down into violet. Sometimes they spoke, a word about the weather, about the creek running low. But more often they didn't. The silence between them shifted from guarded to companionable, the way silence does when people begin to trust. One afternoon, coming in from mending a fence, Elias caught sight of her sitting at the table with a worn notebook. She was sketching, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she noticed him, she snapped the book shut, a flush rising to her cheeks. "Let me see," he said. She hesitated, then slid it across. There in pencil lines were his hands, scarred broad, resting on his knee exactly as they had been a moment before. He studied the drawing for longer than necessary, then gave it back without a word. But later, in the quiet, she smiled to herself, just a little. The gossip didn't stop, not entirely. When Elias went into town for feed, whispers followed him down the street. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with a faint nod of respect given to a man who takes in strays. Clara stayed on the ranch, tending to the chickens, riding the mare in slow circles under the wide sky. She moved more easily now, shoulders less tight, eyes less quick to dart toward the door. One evening, as the sun bled out over the hills, Elias came in to find her sitting by the fire with one of the books he'd brought. She looked up and held it out. "This one's good," she said. It was the first opinion she'd offered unasked. He took it, glanced at the cover, and nodded. She leaned back in a chair, and for the first time since he'd found her, she looked less like someone braced for the next blow. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain. Elias stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking beneath him, and let the air settle over his skin. Behind him, Clara's laughter, quiet, uncertain, but laughter nonetheless, slipped into the night. It was a small sound, yet it filled the space around him, softening the edges of the dark. He knew the past wasn't gone for her, not by a long shot. But maybe here on this patch of stubborn earth, it could loosen its grip. And though the horizon still held storms neither of them could yet see, Elias found himself willing, maybe even wanting, to face whatever came. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel empty when the door closed behind him. The wind had shifted. Elias noticed it first in the way the mare lifted her head, ears turning toward the east, nostrils flaring. By sundown, the air carried something sharper than dust, voices from the saloon in town, carried on rumor before they ever reached his ears. It was Maybelle Hart who told him outright, her voice clipped, eyes darting to the street beyond her doorway. "Your Clara's father's back," she said, "and he's been running his mouth." The words settled in him like cold iron. He didn't ask how she knew. In a place like this, truth traveled faster than the stagecoach. That night, Clara moved through the house with a restlessness he had not seen in weeks. Her gaze kept finding the windows, scanning the dark. When the coyotes called from the ridge, she flinched, retreating to the barn. He found her there, crouched beside the mare's stall, a pitchfork gripped tight in her hands. "He's coming," she whispered, not as a prediction, but as something she felt in her bones. Elias said nothing, only took the pitchfork from her fingers and set aside, his hand brushing her shoulder in a brief, grounding touch. The next morning, he rode into town. The saloon smelled of whiskey and unwashed men, its light dim after the sun outside. Thaddeus Dawson was there at the far table, a half-empty glass before him, grinning as if he'd already won something. He was broader than Elias expected, with eyes that held no trace of regret. Elias crossed the room without hurry, boots striking the floor like punctuation marks. "Clara stays with me," he said, his voice even. Thaddeus leaned back, let the smirk deepen. "You can't own what's already mine," he replied, his words slow, meant to provoke. Elias didn't give him the satisfaction of anger. He turned and left, though his jaw felt carved from stone. 2 days passed without incident. The sun climbed high each morning, burning the dew from the grass, the ranch quiet except for the lowing of cattle. But unease had rooted itself in the air, thickening each hour. Elias kept the Winchester prop by the door, and at night he checked the locks twice. Clara stayed close, her silence deeper now, her hands fidgeting when she thought he wasn't watching. It was just past sunset when it happened. The wind howled in from the north, carrying the metallic scent of a coming storm. Elias stepped outside to secure the barn doors and saw the front gate swinging wide. Before he could call out, a shadow moved along the fence line. Then 2 more. Thaddeus came into view first, a dark shape against the pale grass, followed by 2 rough men whose eyes swept the yard like scavengers. Clara appeared in the doorway behind Elias, her breath catching. One of the drifters moved fast, grabbing her arm and yanking her forward. Elias lunged, but the second man caught him in the ribs, shoving hard enough to send him sprawling into the dirt. The fight that followed was not the clean, choreographed kind. It was fists and grit, the tang of blood in the mouth, boots scraping hard against the ground. Elias managed to throw the second man into the fence, the wood rattling under the impact, but Thaddeus had Clara by the wrist now, dragging her toward the open gate. She kicked once, twice, but his grip was iron. Elias's hand found the butt of the Winchester, but it wasn't in his grasp. Clara had wrenched it free from where it leaned by the porch. She stood there in the lamplight, the barrel aimed square at her father's chest. Her hands trembled, the stock quivering against her shoulder, but her eyes were steady, unblinking. Thaddeus froze, not because he feared the bullet, but because for the first time he saw something in her that was beyond his reach. "You wouldn't," he said, testing the moment. She took one step forward. "Try me." The sound of hooves cut through the standoff. Sheriff Pike's voice followed, sharp and commanding. Within seconds, the drifters were disarmed, their weapons clattering to the ground. Pike hauled Thaddeus toward the wagon, the man still spitting curses into the night. Maybelle was there too, on horseback, eyes scanning Clara before settling on Elias with a brief nod. When the noise faded, when the last hoofbeats blurred into the distance, Clara lowered the rifle. She seemed smaller suddenly, the weight of the moment draining from her shoulders. Elias stepped forward, took the gun gently from her hands and set it aside. He draped a blanket over her, the fabric smelling faintly of smoke and sun. No lecture, no question, just a quiet, unspoken fact that she was safe. The days that followed moved in a softer rhythm. The gossip that had once clung to them now turned to murmurs of what she had done, how she had stood her ground. Some called her brave, others reckless, but Clara didn't seem to hear them. She rode the mare in long, looping paths across the pasture, the wind tangling her hair, the lines of her face less guarded than before. Elias watched from the porch, coffee in hand, a slow ease settling into him. One evening, as the horizon burned gold and crimson, Clara came to sit beside him. She didn't speak at first, just watched the sun drop lower. Then, almost to herself, she said, "I thought I'd never stop running." Elias glanced at her, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't stop. You just find someone to run with." She didn't smile exactly, but her gaze held his for a moment longer than it might have weeks ago. The light shifted, the last of the sun spilling over the land, like it was trying to hold on a little longer. In that glow, the house didn't feel as hollow, the air didn't feel as thin. Clara leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath her. Somewhere out on the ridge, a hawk called. Elias thought of all the ways life could tie a person down, the knots it could twist into your spirit. And he thought of that night at the fence, how a single cut of rope had set a different story in motion. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of fresh rain from the north. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, breathing it in. Elias looked out at the horizon, knowing there would be more storms ahead, but for now, the sky was clear.